Hello lovers. Eleanor here. Tonight, we will embark on a journey, not across oceans by ship or through the skies by plane, but through words, ruins, and memories. I sit here now in my quiet living room, the lamplight trembling faintly against the old wallpaper. Outside, the night deepens, and the only company I keep is the whisper of the clock and the sigh of the wind at the window. Loneliness, my dears, can feel like an endless siege. The silence presses in until one must either surrender or find a story strong enough to hold back the dark. And what story could be stronger than that of Troy? The city sung into eternity by Homer, where warriors of unmatched courage fought for honor, for love, for glory, and perhaps for nothing at all. The story of Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. The story of Achilles, proud and nearly immortal, raging against fate. The story of Hector, noble defender of his home, cut down at the city gates. And of course, the story of the wooden horse. So clever, so treacherous, so unforgettable. If you enjoy these journeys through time, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me, what is your favorite historical mystery? I love hearing the legends that stir your hearts. Now, settle in comfortably, close your eyes, and let's travel back in time with Eleanor. I often think about why Troy still matters. Was it real? Was it myth? Or was it both, interwoven like threads in a tapestry? Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are not dry chronicles. They are poems, filled with gods who meddle and mortals who bleed. Yet, hidden in the verses are echoes of a real war, a real city, a real burning. The lines between legend and history blur until one no longer knows whether we are reading memory or dream. That is what touches me so deeply. Because isn't life itself a weaving of truth and story? When I speak of Robert, my beloved gone these many years, I cannot help but remember him both as he was and as I imagine him still. The truth of his smile, the myth of how I like to believe he never truly left me. Facts and memory dance together until they are inseparable. Perhaps Troy survives because it does the same for all of us, reminding us that even if we cannot prove every detail, we can still feel its truth in our bones. There is a thrill, too, in knowing that Troy is not only a tale. For centuries, people believed it might be nothing more than Homer's dream. And then, in the 19th century, a man named Heinrich Schliemann dug into the soil of Iliad in Turkey and declared, "Here it is. Troy." What he found was complicated, layered, full of contradictions. But it lit a fire in the world. Perhaps the songs of Homer were not just songs, but windows into history. As I sip my tea, I run my fingers over the rim of the cup and imagine holding instead a shard of pottery from Troy, still warm with the ashes of its burning. Did the people who lived there know they would be remembered forever, even if their city fell? Or did they think they would vanish into dust, as so many others have? That, to me, is the power of Troy. It reminds us that even ruin can be remembered, that even loss can become legend. And so, my friends, in this quiet house filled with absence, I find comfort in Troy. For if a city can burn and still whisper to us across 3,000 years, then perhaps we, too, are never entirely lost. When we speak of Troy, we cannot begin anywhere else but with Homer. His words, woven into the Iliad and the Odyssey, are the threads that have bound this story to human memory for millennia. The Iliad does not tell the whole war, Only a few weeks in the final year. But oh, what weeks they are! Achilles' rage. Hector's defiance. The sorrow of Priam. The tears of Andromache. These are not dry lists of battles, but living portraits of grief, love, and fate. Homer sings of men, but also of gods, who stride into the battlefield with thunder and flame, bending mortal lives as though they were reeds in the wind. I sometimes think about the power of words to outlive stone. Troy itself lay in ruins. Its walls tumbled. Its palaces turned to ash. And yet Homer's voice carried the city into eternity. Isn't that remarkable? A poet, blind according to tradition, gave Troy more immortality than any fortress could. And I feel the same, in a smaller way, when I turn the pages of Robert's old journals. His handwriting is shaky in places, confident in others, but through his words, his voice still lingers, even though his chair is empty. The pen can hold back death in ways even warriors cannot. Homer's epics are more than stories. They are cultural anchors. For the Greeks, they were a mirror of identity. What it meant to be heroic, to be honorable, to be human. The very education of young men once began with learning passages of the Iliad. To stand on the battlefield of life, they needed to know Achilles' pride, Hector's courage, Odysseus' cunning. The poems were not history books, but they shaped history, giving meaning to actions long after the flames of Troy had cooled. And yet, we must ask, was Homer recounting truth, or creating myth? Did Achilles truly stalk the walls of Troy? Or was he born from the poet's imagination? Were the gods present? Or were they metaphors for forces we cannot control? Scholars still debate, and likely always will. But perhaps it doesn't matter whether the characters were flesh and blood or words on parchment. What matters is that they carry truths of the human heart. Pride that leads to ruin. Love that endures loss. Rage that blinds. Courage that redeems. One of the lesser-known aspects of Homer is how he humanized even the enemy. Hector is not a villain. He is noble, devoted to his family, willing to die for his city. When I first taught his farewell to Andromache, I wept in front of my students. Hector knew he would not survive. Yet he reached for his child, knowing the boy would never remember his father. That scene has echoed in my heart ever since. Perhaps because, in my own way, I too said farewell to Robert, knowing he would leave me, hoping my children would carry some memory of him forward. But the Odyssey, too, reminds us that the war was only the beginning. For Odysseus, the real trial was finding his way home. Through monsters and temptations, storms and despair. And isn't that what we all seek? To find our way home, even when life hurls us into seas we never asked to sail? Sometimes, in the quiet of night, I feel like Penelope, weaving and unweaving my days, waiting for a voice that may never return. And so Homer gives us more than battles. He gives us the poetry of endurance. Troy may or may not have stood as he described, but in his lines, it will always stand. And through his songs, it teaches us not only how to fight, but how to wait, how to endure, how to love, and how to grieve. I find myself smiling at the thought that somewhere, thousands of years ago, a poet's words became a lifeline, not just for his people but for us today. Words survive where walls fall. And that is why Troy, even if it were only legend, will never be lost. If Homer's poetry gives us the framework of Troy, then it is the figures within his verses who give it soul. Without Achilles and Hector, without Agamemnon and Helen, the war would be just another clash of armies long forgotten. But these names, these characters, whether flesh or myth, carry the weight of memory like torches across the centuries. Achilles, the greatest of the Greeks, stands at the center, blazing with both brilliance and flaw. Invincible in body, but not in pride. His rage at Agamemnon, his refusal to fight, and then his fury at the death of Patroclus, all shape the rhythm of the Iliad. He is strength and weakness bound together, proof that even the mightiest are undone not by swords but by emotions. How human he feels, even clothed in myth. Hector, on the other hand, was the beating heart of Troy. Unlike Achilles, he fought not for glory but for family, for city, for love. His duel with Achilles remains one of the most poignant scenes in literature. Knowing he would fall, Hector still stood. His death was not only the loss of a warrior but the soul of a city. When I think of him, I feel the echo of my own losses. The way Robert, in his final days, stood tall despite the illness that sought to break him. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is walking forward even when fear consumes you. Then there is Agamemnon, the Greek commander, whose pride sparked the quarrel with Achilles. He reminds us that leadership often falters under the weight of ego. And Menelaus, wronged husband of Helen, whose wound of betrayal launched the 1,000 ships. And Odysseus, ever cunning, the mind as sharp as any blade, whose idea of the wooden horse would seal Troy's fate. Each figure a fragment of humanity. Pride, honor, love, cleverness, grief. And how can we not pause at Helen? Was she a willing lover of Paris, or a stolen bride? A victim of desire, or the spark of destruction? The poets never agree, and perhaps that is why she endures. She is less a woman than a symbol, embodying beauty's power to shape destiny. When I was younger, students would ask me, was Helen real? I would smile and say, real or not, she has been real enough to live in our imagination for 3,000 years. One lesser-known figure who fascinates me is Aeneas, a Trojan prince who survives the fall. Later Roman poets, especially Virgil, would make him the ancestor of Rome itself. His escape from Troy, carrying his father on his back, became an image of survival, of continuity amid collapse. It is a story that comforts me. That even when cities fall and walls crumble, someone carries the torch forward. I like to think of myself that way. In my small, quiet life. Carrying Robert's memory forward. Bearing it like Aeneas bore his father. Not letting it fall into silence. And of course, the gods hovered above them all. Meddling and mocking. Athena guiding the Greeks. Apollo siding with the Trojans. Zeus torn between justice and whim. To the ancients, these gods were explanations for fortune and failure. To us, they are metaphors for the chaos of life. The unseen forces that shape our fates. Illness, grief, love, chance. All the gods still stride through our days, though we no longer name them. What strikes me most, as I sit here in the dim glow of my lamp, is how these characters, whether true or imagined, are not distant statues but mirrors. We see in Achilles our anger, in Hector our loyalty, in Helen our beauty and our burden, in Odysseus our cunning, in Aeneas our survival. That is why Troy endures. Because it is not only their story, but ours. And yet, even with these vivid figures, the war might have slipped into the fog of forgotten myths. If not for one tale so ingenious, so unforgettable, that it secured Troy's place forever. The trick of the wooden horse. The horse. Even those who know nothing else of Troy know this tale. A giant wooden horse, wheeled to the gates of the city, left behind as an offering. The Trojans, weary from years of siege, gazed upon it with suspicion and wonder. Was it a gift to the gods? Or a trick? Voices differed. Some urged caution. Others, weary of war, longed to believe in peace. And so, with the fateful blindness of hope, they dragged the horse into their city. That night, as Troy slept, Greek warriors slipped from the hollow belly of the beast, opened the gates, and Troy burned. It is one of the greatest stories of cunning in human memory. So powerful that Trojan horse still means deception today. And yet, the irony is that this tale, so vivid in our minds, does not appear in Homer's Iliad. It belongs instead to later poets, Virgil in the Aeneid, and others who sought to complete the saga. Homer ended with Hector's funeral, not with the fall of Troy. It was later voices who gave us the horse, and in doing so, gave Troy its immortal symbol. I sometimes wonder whether the horse was ever real. Was it truly a wooden structure, rolled into the city? Or was it a poetic metaphor? Some scholars suggest it may have been a siege engine, a battering ram shaped like a horse, misunderstood in later retellings. Others believe it could represent an earthquake, for Poseidon, god of both horses and quakes, was said to shake the walls of Troy. The horse, then, might not have been wood at all, but the trembling of the earth. But perhaps the truth matters less than the symbol. For the horse is not just a story of trickery. It is a story of trust misplaced, of vigilance abandoned, of the cost of ignoring warnings. Cassandra, the prophetess cursed never to be believed, cried out against bringing the horse inside. But no one listened. Her voice was drowned in the clamor of false hope. How often in history, in our own lives, do we ignore the Cassandras? The warnings whispered that we choose not to hear. I recall, painfully, the night Robert came home pale and weary, insisting it was nothing more than exhaustion. I begged him to see a doctor. He waved me off, just as the Trojans waved off Cassandra. By the time we sought help, it was too late. I live with that regret. How easy it is to pull the horse inside, to believe what we wish rather than what we fear. The wooden horse also reveals the dual nature of cunning. Odysseus, its architect, is celebrated for his wit. Yet wit can destroy as surely as it can save. The Greeks triumphed through deception, not strength. What lesson does that leave us? That cleverness can conquer walls. But at what cost? Troy was reduced to ash. Women and children enslaved. Heroes slain. Victory came not with honor, but with trickery. Perhaps that is why the story lingers. Not as a celebration, but as a warning. And still, the image endures. Artists across centuries have painted the horse, massive against the walls of Troy. Trojans straining to drag it inside. Greeks hidden within like shadows of fate. Even in modern times, the term Trojan horse is used for computer viruses, for plots hidden within gifts. A story 3,000 years old still shapes the language of our dangers. I imagine the final night of Troy. Fires rising, screams echoing in the streets, warriors pouring out from the horse. Gates flung wide for the Greek army. The king Priam, struck down in his own palace. The temples desecrated. The city consumed. And amid the chaos, Aeneas slipping away with his father on his back, carrying the seed of a new destiny. Out of ashes, Rome would one day claim its mythic ancestor. As I sit here with the fire dying low in my hearth, I realize that the story of the horse is more than myth. It is a mirror of human nature. We long for peace. We accept gifts too easily. We ignore warnings. And we are undone by our own hope. Troy's fall is not just their tragedy. It is ours. Repeated across time. In different forms. Under different skies. And so, whether written or metaphor, true or invented, the horse stands eternal. A reminder that the greatest dangers sometimes arrive not with swords drawn, but disguised as gifts. For centuries, Troy lived in the realm of poetry. Many dismissed it as pure invention. A stage for Homer's heroes and gods. Nothing more. And then came the 19th century. And a man with more passion than prudence. Heinrich Schliemann. He was no scholar in the traditional sense, but a dreamer. A merchant turned archaeologist, whose heart beat to Homer's verses. He believed utterly that Troy was real, and that he would find it. Schliemann turned his gaze to Hisar Lake, a mound in northwestern Turkey that locals had long overlooked. With Homer in one hand and a spade in the other, he began to dig. And dig. And dig. His methods were brutal. By modern standards. He tore through layers of earth, destroying as much as he uncovered. But in his fury of excavation, he struck something extraordinary. Walls. Gates. Burned debris. A city. Buried beneath centuries of soil. I imagine his excitement. Standing in the dust. Holding fragments of pottery. Glimpsing stones that might once have felt Hector's footsteps. For Schliemann, this was vindication. Homer was not mere fancy. His Troy had a body. A skeleton buried in the earth. And then came the crowning discovery. What Schliemann called Priam's treasure, a hoard of gold jewelry, diadems, and ornaments. He declared it the riches of Troy's doomed king, hidden during the sack. The world was enchanted. Newspapers blazed with headlines. Troy found. A legend proven. A poet justified. But, as with all legends, the truth was more complicated. Later archaeologists showed that the treasure Schliemann unearthed came from a layer far older than Homer's Troy. He had misstated it. And in his zeal, he had destroyed valuable evidence, cutting away centuries of history to reach the city he sought. His treasure was real. But it was not Priam's. His Troy was real. But it was many Troys layered atop one another. And yet, despite the errors, Schliemann changed history. He proved that beneath the myths lay real ruins. Real cities built and destroyed again and again. He gave flesh to what had been only song. Perhaps he was reckless. But sometimes it takes recklessness to pierce centuries of doubt. I smile thinking of him. Because in some small way, I understand his obsession. When Robert died, I buried myself in his old letters. His books. His photographs. Searching for him in the layers of memory. I made mistakes too. I misread. I overreached. I thought one scribbled note meant more than it did. But still, in the act of digging, I found him again. In fragments. In whispers. Schliemann sought Troy. I sought Robert. Both of us. Archaeologists of the heart. One lesser-known figure in Schliemann's story is his wife, Sophia. She was the one who famously wore the so-called jewels of Helen, draped in gold as photographs were taken. There is something almost poetic in that image. A woman standing amid ruins, wearing treasures from millennia past, embodying the bridge between myth and reality. Of course, those jewels were not truly Helen's, but in that moment, they might as well have been. The line between fact and imagination blurred again, and the world leaned closer to listen. Even now, Schliemann's name sparks debate. Was he a pioneer or a plunderer? A hero of archaeology or a reckless romantic? Perhaps he was both. But without him, Troy might still be nothing but poetry in the eyes of the modern world. His spade, clumsy though it was, pulled Homer's city into the light. And it makes me wonder how much of our history is uncovered by those who break rules, who chase dreams others dismiss. Without such dreamers, would Troy still lie silent, its stones unseen? Without my own stubbornness, would I still sit here night after night, whispering Robert's name into the silence, hoping to keep him alive? Sometimes, love and obsession are not so different. So yes, Schliemann erred. And yes, his treasure was misplaced. But his passion cracked the wall between myth and history. And once that wall was broken, there was no turning back. Troy was no longer just Homer's song. It was stone and earth, artifact and ash. What Schliemann uncovered was only the beginning. Later archaeologists returned to Hisarlik with more careful hands and sharper eyes. They realized the mound was not one city but many, built one atop another, like layers of memory. Troy was not a single place in time. It was a palimpsest of centuries, each generation riding over the last, leaving behind ashes, stones, and shards. As they peeled back the soil, they found 9 major layers, each marked by its own walls, houses, and traces of life. Some layers were small settlements, modest and fragile. Others were mighty citadels, ringed with massive fortifications. And among them, at least 2 layers bore scars of destruction. Walls toppled, buildings charred, weapons scattered in the ruins. These became the candidates for Homer's Troy. Troy Vi, dating to around 1700. 1250 BCE, was a city of grandeur, fortified with sloping stone walls, towers, and gates wide enough to impress any poet. Its destruction around 1250 BCE fits the time frame many scholars associate with the Trojan War. Then came Troy 7, rebuilt on the ashes, crowded with small houses, granaries, and signs of strain. Destroyed again around 1180 BCE. War, fire, famine. Whatever struck, it was catastrophic. One layer ended in silence. The next began in ruin. I close my eyes and imagine standing on those walls before their fall. The wind off the Aegean, carrying the scent of salt and smoke. The gates creaking as merchants arrive, bringing goods from across the sea. And then, chaos. Fire racing through the streets. Women clutching children. Soldiers clashing in the night. We do not know if this was Homer's war. But the stones remember something violent. Something final. Even the smallest details stir the imagination. Archaeologists found large storage jars in Troy 7, filled with grain, as though the people had braced for siege. They found skeletons hastily buried. Signs of sudden violence. Was this Priam's city? Was this the night of the horse? Or was it another war? Long before or long after? forgotten except in these mute remains? I think of memory in layers too. In this house, Robert and I left our own strata. The photographs on the wall are one layer. The recipes he scribbled another. The letters in the attic yet another. Some days, I feel like an archaeologist brushing through the sediment of my own life. Each drawer covered a new discovery. Some layers are bright, full of laughter. Others are charred, marked by grief. But together, they form the whole of us. The debate over Troy's layers continues. Some argue that Troy's fall, likely from an earthquake, was later reimagined by poets as a war. Others hold fast to Troy Seven's destruction as the true war of Homer's song. Perhaps both are true, blended in memory and myth. The city fell more than once, and in those repeated tragedies, storytellers found a single epic. And isn't that the way of history? Rarely does it offer us one clean story. Instead, it gives us fragments, ruins, contradictions. We long for clarity, but what we find are layers. Some burned, some rebuilt, some whispering truths that may never align. Troy is no different. It is both many cities and one city, both history and myth. One archaeologist once called Troy a place where history and legend shake hands. I find that image beautiful. In my own life, too, legend and history entwine. The history of Robert is his life. The years we lived. The meals we shared. The love we knew. The legend is how I remember him. Gilded by time. Softened by longing. Both are true. In their own way. Both are necessary. So we stand at Hisar Lake, looking down into the trenches where 9 Troys lie stacked upon each other. Which one was Homer's? Perhaps all of them. Perhaps none. The soil does not answer, only hums with silence. And into that silence, we pour our questions, our hopes, our stories. As the soil revealed its layers, scholars turned to debate. Was Homer describing a real war? Or was he weaving pure myth? The arguments stretch across centuries like a tug-of-war rope, pulling us between poetry and archaeology. Some historians insist the Iliad contains kernels of truth. A war in the late Bronze Age, fought over trade routes or honor, later embroidered by poets into something divine. Others argue that Troy is less a place than a symbol. That Homer gave voice to a universal longing for glory and loss, not to an actual event. I find myself caught between these poles. On quiet evenings, when I read Homer by lamplight, the words feel so vivid, so immediate, that it is hard not to believe some memory lies beneath them. The grief of Priam clasping Achilles' hands. The fury of Hector on the battlefield. Such scenes seem born of lived experience. And yet, memory is tricky. Have you ever remembered something so often that you're no longer sure if it happened exactly that way? Perhaps the Iliad is humanity's memory of war itself, distilled into a single story. Whether or not Troy was real. One of the more curious debates centers on whether Helen herself ever existed. Was there truly a woman whose beauty became the spark of 1,000 ships? Or is she the embodiment of desire and danger? Some scholars see her as myth. Others as a memory of queens whose stories were magnified. I think of her less as a woman than as an eternal question. How much of history is shaped not by fact, but by the power we give to symbols? There is also the matter of Homer himself. Did one man compose these epics? Or were they the collective product of generations of singers, their voices blending until they became Homer? If the latter, then Troy is less a single event than a shared dream. told and retold until it felt like memory. The truth of Troy, then, lies not in walls or weapons, but in words. The 20th century brought more questions than answers. Scholars uncovered Hittite texts from Anatolia, referencing conflicts in the region that may align with the timeline of Troy. Names that sound faintly like Walusa and Ahiawa. Echoes, perhaps, of Ilios and Achilles. Was Homer's war a distant echo of these skirmishes? Or was he shaping scraps of rumor into epic song? The fragments tease us. Never whole. Never final. I think of Robert in this, too. After he was gone, friends would tell me their memories of him. Each story a little different. In one, he was funny. In another, solemn. In still another, wise. Which was true? All of them. None of them. He was memory and myth together, shaped by the hearts that loved him. Perhaps Troy is like that. A collective act of remembrance. Not bound by facts alone but by the need to tell a story big enough to carry grief and pride. And so, the debate continues. Historians demand proof. Burned layers. Weapons. Texts. Poets say proof is beside the point. I sit here tonight, sipping my cooling tea, and I find myself asking, must history always be proven to be true? Or is truth sometimes found in the telling, in the resonance, in the way a story lodges in our hearts and refuses to leave? What is certain is this. Whether or not the Trojan War happened as Homer sang, the story has shaped us. It has defined how we imagine courage, how we understand love and betrayal, how we think of war and its costs. And perhaps that influence matters more than whether the walls Schliemann dug were Priam's or not. Troy is real because we have made it real. By carrying its tale through time. Troy might have burned long ago. But in truth it never died. Its ashes were carried forward. Not only in Homer's verses but in the imaginations of generations that followed. Few stories have so deeply soaked into the fabric of culture. From the playwrights of ancient Athens to the painters of the Renaissance. From Shakespeare's stage to Hollywood's screens. Troy has been rebuilt again and again. Not in stone, but in story. The Greeks themselves turned Troy into tragedy. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides wrote plays that echoed its fall. In their hands, Helen became both victim and villain. Cassandra a voice of feudal truth. Andromache the embodiment of grief. Audiences wept not for warriors but for the women left behind. The broken families. The survivors forced into slavery. Even in antiquity, Troy was more than heroics. It was a meditation on the cost of war. When Rome rose, Troy became its ancestor. Virgil's Aeneid gave the city new life, casting Aeneas as the forefather of Rome. Out of Troy's ashes, empire was born. Isn't it extraordinary? A fallen city used as the seat of legitimacy for a world-conquering power. Rome claimed Troy not as ruin, but as heritage, turning loss into a story of destiny. The Renaissance painted Troy in colors of grandeur. Artists draped Helen in silks. Sculptors carved Achilles in marble. Poets revived the verses in their own tongues. Even Shakespeare could not resist, weaving references into his plays. Troilus and Cressida showing the war through the lens of love and betrayal. A reminder that even in the grandest conflicts, human hearts stumble in familiar ways. And in our own time? Cinema has given us sprawling spectacles of Troy, with ships filling the sea and heroes clashing beneath digital skies. Some find these films shallow, others thrilling. but I smile at the thought. Thousands of years later, people still buy tickets to see Troy burn again. The story refuses to die, because we refuse to let it. I confess, I sometimes feel like Troy when I look at my own reflection. The Eleanor of my youth has crumbled. My face bears the ruins of time. Wrinkles where smooth skin once was. Silvery hair where once there was gold. And yet, just as Troy is painted fresh in each generation, I find ways to tell my story anew. Through photographs. Through teaching. Through these evenings with you. Perhaps we are all like Troy. Rebuilt again and again in memory. Even as our walls weaken. One story often overlooked is how medieval Europeans believed Troy to be the origin of their own peoples. The British traced their mythical roots to Trojan exiles. The French claimed descent from Priam's kin. Across the continent, kings and chroniclers used Troy as a mirror of their own grandeur. Everyone wanted a piece of its ashes. What does that say about us? That we long to tie ourselves to ruins. Perhaps it is because ruins make us feel eternal. As if our stories too will outlast the flames. I think about the power of stories when I recall Robert reading aloud to our children at night. His voice gave life to knights, dragons, and heroes. Those tales became part of our children's imaginations, shaping how they saw the world. And now, when I tell them about Troy, I see the same spark in their eyes. Stories endure because they shape us, long after the storytellers are gone. So yes, Troy exists in ruins of stone at Hisar Lake. But it also exists in Virgil's poetry, in Shakespeare's words, in Renaissance canvases, in Hollywood films, in children listening to their father's voice at bedtime. Troy lives wherever we retell it. And maybe that is the truest immortality. Not walls of stone, but words and images that cannot be reduced to ash. The question presses upon us still. What is truth? And what is imagination? When it comes to Troy. Archaeologists sift soil for proof. Historians weigh fragments of Hittite tablets. Yet poets and playwrights keep weaving their versions. Somewhere between the spade and the pen lies the meaning of Troy. Perhaps this is the real gift of the story. That it does not demand a single truth. It allows us to hold contradictions. A city both real and imagined. A war both fact and fable. A horse both wood and metaphor. The tension between history and legend is precisely what makes it endure. Were Troy only myth, it might have faded like other forgotten tales. Were it only fact, it might have been just another city in a textbook. But because it is both, it glows with mystery. I sometimes think of Robert in the same way. There is the history of him. His birth date. The job he held. The years we spent together. And then there is the legend of him. The way I tell stories about his humor. His kindness. The way I imagine what he might say if he were here now. Both exist. Side by side. The truth of his life and the myth of my memory. And perhaps that is what keeps him alive to me. Just as Troy lives through its dual nature. Scholars remind us that even if the Trojan War was smaller than Homer described, more raid than grand campaign, it still mattered. Wars of that age were brutal. And the destruction of even a single citadel could send shockwaves across the region. Perhaps Homer magnified the event. Stretched it across 10 years. Filled it with gods and speeches. Because that is what memory does. It enlarges. Embellishes. So the meaning is not lost. We do the same with our personal stories. A single moment of kindness from Robert becomes, in my retelling, an emblem of our whole marriage. We need the story to carry the weight that simple fact cannot. And what of the wooden horse? Even if it never rolled through Troy's gates, it has become true through its power as a symbol. Deception hidden within a gift. How many times has that warning been retold in our lives? Our politics. Even our technology. A myth. Perhaps. But truer than many facts. Because it continues to shape the way we see the world. So what do we do with Troy? Do we chase proof endlessly? Or do we rest in the mystery? I believe the answer lies in balance. Archaeology gives us walls and ash. Poetry gives us meaning and soul. Together, they form a story strong enough to endure millennia. And perhaps that is the lesson. History is not only about what happened, but about what we remember, what we imagine, what we choose to carry forward. Troy is both a ruin in Turkey and a fire in our imaginations. It is both ashes and song. As I sip my tea and listen to the night settling around me, I wonder, do we cling to Troy because we want to know the past? Or because we fear forgetting ourselves? Do we build myths to explain ruins? Or do ruins survive because myths keep them alive? These are questions no spade can answer. No poem can settle. But perhaps it is enough that we keep asking. And so, my dear listeners, we come full circle. The firelight in my room has dimmed. And the night has grown heavy. I began with the silence of my own house. And now I end with the silence of Troy. Stones buried. Walls broken. Voices long gone. And yet, both my silence and Troy's are not empty. They are filled with memory. With echoes. With whispers that time cannot erase. What strikes me most is how Troy mirrors our own lives. It was a city of glory, beauty, and strength. And yet it fell. Perhaps through war. Perhaps through cunning. Perhaps through the fragile nature of all things human. But in falling, it became eternal. Its ruins gave birth to legend. And its legend gave birth to culture. From Homer's verses to Virgil's destiny. From Renaissance canvases to modern cinema. Troy has shaped the imagination of humanity more than many cities that still stand. I think of my own small life here. Of Robert's memory and the layers of love and loss we built together. Our home was once vibrant with laughter. Now quieter. But not empty. Like Troy, I endure through the telling of our story. Perhaps each of us carries our own Troy inside. A place of past joy. Of battles fought. Of losses borne. And of memories that refuse to die. And so, whether Troy was a war or a poem, a ruin or a dream, it is real. Real in the way it teaches us that history is not only stone and soil, but story and soul. Real in the way it reminds us that collapse is never the end. That ashes can become seeds. That memory is itself a kind of immortality. As I close my eyes now, I hear the sea against Troy's shore. The clash of swords. The cries of grief. The creak of a wooden horse being pulled across the earth. And I hear, too, the voice of Homer, chanting verses that still make the heart tremble. It is not proof that makes Troy real. It is our need to remember. Our longing to give shape to love and loss. To honor and betrayal. To the eternal struggle of being human. The night deepens. And my words slow. We have traveled together from the quiet of this little room into the roar of battle. Into the ashes of ruins. Into the questions of history and the dreams of poetry. And now it is time to rest. So let Troy linger with you as you drift into sleep. Not as a place of destruction, but as a reminder that stories endure. That love and grief, pride and hope, are threads woven into us all. The city may have fallen, but its voice remains, whispering still across the ages.